Hello, everyone. Welcome to Monona Terrace's Wright Design Series, virtual edition. Here we are on a quite cold, wintry day in Madison, Wisconsin. I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving weekend and maybe are a little warmer than we are here. My name is Heather Sabin. I'm program coordinator at Monona Terrace. And as many of you know who've been loyal attendees of this series, we have moved the program to Zoom since May and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. I did notice that this lecture was promoted by a couple other organizations in the Wright community, and I thank those organizations. We have a strong attendance here today, which is great. Our presenter, Dan Nichols, is happy to take a few minutes of your questions after his presentation today. And I would ask that you use the Q&A button on your screen to communicate those questions. Now you can write them during the presentation and I will go to them following Dan's lecture and read them off, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Our lecture is being recorded today, so if you cannot attend the whole duration or you'd like to share with a friend, you can go to our website, mononaterrace.com/webinars, and you will find recordings of the lectures there. It normally takes a couple of days for those to go up, so I would say by the weekend, we should certainly see this presentation in our library. And now I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker today, Dan Nichols. He is a partner at Ragan Group Architects, LLC, a South Jersey-based architectural firm that is focused on commercial, municipal, and multifamily projects. Nichols' interest in architecture grew from his discovery of Frank Lloyd Wright at the age of 10 in a 1956 Arizona Highways magazine, eventually leading him to earn a Bachelor of Architecture degree at Carnegie Mellon. He is a member of the Cherry Hill, New Jersey Historical Commission, where he has been an advocate for the preservation of notable 20th century buildings, assisting in the effort to find preservation-minded buyers for local houses designed by Louis Kahn and Malcolm Wells. Nichols and his wife, Christine Denario, are the current owners of Wright's 1950 J.A. Sweeten House, which they have been gradually restoring since 2008. And I'm really pleased that he's here to share his story today. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. As with many of Wright's projects in the Usonian era, the Sweeten House began with a letter. In August of 1948, Muriel Sweeten and her husband, John Alfred, wrote a letter to Frank Lloyd Wright asking him to design them a house for a piece of ground that they had just purchased. Mr. Sweeten had just retired from a career in the Navy. He had attended Annapolis and was sent by the Navy to MIT after Annapolis, and he was a naval architect with the Navy Department. And he had retired just after World War II. Muriel Sweeten, who was actually more the instigator of reaching out to Frank Lloyd Wright, had grown up in Wisconsin. I don't know if she knew of Wright in her childhood, but she came to know of Wright in the 1930s when she worked as a secretary in an architectural firm in North Jersey or in New York. She attended a lecture with some other people from the office in the 1930s and was very much captivated by Wright's work. So when she and Mr. Sweeten were looking to build their forever house after being in the Navy, they wouldn't have to move anymore. They decided to reach out to Frank Lloyd Wright. And in the letter, there were some standout phrases in the letter which really set the tone for the way that they wanted their house to be. And Frank Lloyd Wright really did seem to read the letter carefully and follow their intents. They described themselves as having our life is informal and unpretentious. Could you design us an informal ranch type house with 3 bedrooms? Building costs and post-war problems had dwindled our hopes of ever realizing our dream until we read Mr. Lauren Pope's story in a recent copy of House Beautiful. If Mr. Pope could do it, so must we. Can you help us? Sincerely, Muriel and Alfred Sweet. Wright replied very soon thereafter, and in his short reply, he said, we would like to help you. It turns out that quite a few of Wright's clients in the late 1940s, early 1950s were inspired by Lauren Pope, a Wright client from the late 1930s, early 40s. He was a newspaper man who had written an article on House Beautiful. Many were inspired by that article to approach Wright, and the Sweetens were one of those. So Wright responded with a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house. This is a perspective that was drawn by Wright's studio for the house. The house was designed for the Sweetens lot. The lot was primarily flat, but had a little steep spot in the back, and Wright had designed the house to be right at the edge of the embankment. To meet the Sweetens budget, Wright did revise the design. He mirror imaged it and made it be sited entirely on the flat portion of the site. This enabled the costs to stay where the Sweetens needed them to be. The initial budget was intended to be $15,000, with Wright's fee being $1,500 or 10%. The as-built house, with a number of additional items requested by the Sweetens, including an additional room and some extras that the Sweetens had asked Wright to tack on. The price, including land and well and utilities and all that, was just a little bit less than $24,000. A lot of money for a single family home in 1950-51, but in Wright's world, that was a relatively inexpensive house. This is the final floor plan of the house. It was an inline plan. There's a cantilevered carport at the end, at the north end of the house, that provides the drama and the compression as one reaches the front door, and then there's a release as one goes into the cathedral ceiling living room. The kitchen and services are at the knuckle of this polywog. If you picture this as the head and this is the tail. We have a bathroom and 3 bedrooms, and then a room that was added late in the design by Wright at the Sweetens' request for a workshop at the end of the house. It's connected into the master bedroom, which actually became very convenient for us in some of our later efforts with the house. But there's also an exterior door and some windows. The boiler for the house, which runs the radiant heat system, which, knock on wood, still keeps us nice and warm. This basement space is beneath the kitchen and is accessed from a very steep exterior stairway. And if I could zoom in on this picture, but I can't, it says as requested by owner. Wright had intended to have the stair inside the house, but I think the Sweetens were looking to try to get, and as the design progressed, the stair kept on moving around, and it eventually went to the outside. And I think Wright was concerned about the stair being outside, and the Sweetens were not concerned about that. I can see why Wright was concerned about it. It can get really slippery. It is what it is. So, these are some construction pictures of the house. You can see the block work going up. Mrs. Sweeten standing here observing the construction going on in her house. Most notably here in this picture, you'll see steel beams. These are what support the cantilevered carport of the house. These beams are bearing on concrete block walls, and there are steel rods at the back end of the beam that run down through the block and down to the foundation. So this thing acts like if you will, a diving board. It's anchored back here. The masonry wall provides a fulcrum, and then you have the cantilever out here, and that holds up the cantilevered roof. Another few pictures, you can see that carport beam again. This is the north wall. This is a window that looks into the living room. This is the carport. This is a picture within the living room looking towards the kitchen being here, living room here. You can see the steel beam from the carport right One of the things I'm often asked about the house is, how in God's name is this hood above the fireplace, this cantilevered hood, staying up? Well, it's staying up because Wright buried some steel here. These are steel angles that are let in and bolted into the masonry. And this angle brace holds a steel lintel, which holds up the masonry hood of the fireplace. This flue back here is running from the boiler down in the basement. This is an aerial photo of the house taken around 1954. The Sweetens had bought a 7-acre piece of ground. The steep slope that Wright was going to build up against is right where these trees are. It couldn't be farmed. There was a blueberry patch back here and a peach orchard out front. It doesn't look like that today. Kings Highway is no longer 2 lanes, it's now 4. And there's a suburban office building sitting here, suburban office building sitting here, and a bank over here. What had happened was that the Sweetens lived in the house from they moved in the fall of 51, and they lived here until 1974. When they went to sell the house to move into smaller accommodations as they got older, the zoning had changed, turning all this property into commercial. And they couldn't find a buyer who wanted to buy the house as a residential property. They sold instead to a developer and had a handshake agreement with the developer that the house would not be torn down. The developer was looking to develop frontage property along Kings Highway, and he subdivided off the house under a 3/4 acre lot. And the land back here eventually was declared wetland and can't be developed now, so I have a relatively protected view. But there's an office building and parking lot that I passed through to go into the house, and there's a hedgerow that separates the two now. These are some pictures just after the house was finished. This picture was taken around 1959, 1960. And this is a picture inside the living room. We can see in here some of Wright's furniture. You can see the sectional dining room table and the sectional chairs. They were pushed up against the wall, banquette style. You can kind of see into the kitchen. This louvered separation between the kitchen is actually really nice. It enables, it provides some separation from the kitchen to the dining room, but it allows Mrs. Sweeten to be able to see what's going on at the dining table. And here's Mrs. Sweeten on her porch. This was for a newspaper article in 1965. And this is inside the living room, Mrs. Sweeten at her loom. Mrs. Sweeten was a very artistic type by all accounts, and my talking with her children and grandchildren. She was quite the weaver. She wove all the fabrics that you see on the Wright Design furniture and even on this chair that she recovered, and these draperies, and the bedspreads and most of the fabrics in the house that she had woven. The Sweetens were an interesting couple in that Mrs. Sweeten was the artistic type, and Mr. Sweeten was very much the engineering kind of guy, having been a naval architect. But in the correspondence that I was graciously given by the Sweetens' daughter, I've read the correspondence between the Sweetens and Wright's office. And all of the questions and comments that had to do with aesthetics seemed to come from Muriel. All of the technical questions seemed to come from Alfred. And they seemed to have a very good relationship with Wright's office. They worked with Davy Davison. And Davy answered a lot of the questions. And then there were some where the responses were Mr. Wright says or Mr. Wright suggests. But it seemed like the way to work with Mr. Wright, and there certainly were a lot of evolution of the design as it went through the process. It seemed like the Sweetens weren't just telling Wright, we don't like this or we don't like that. It was a matter of they generally liked the design, but they were making suggestions that could help the house better fit their lifestyle. And Wright seemed to be very open to making changes based on those requests. So this is Mr. Sweeten sitting in his easy chair with his evening libation. We can see again the kitchen and the dining room beyond. And again, the dining room. The tables were in 3 pieces so that they could be moved around. All of the furniture that was designed for the Sweeten house was movable. There was very little that was built in other than shelving. this was because the house was meant to be an inexpensive house. So the furniture was meant to be able to be moved around for different purposes or different flexibilities and all those kinds of things. To some extent, that was a little bit of the death knell for the furniture in the house. When the Sweetens left the house, the furniture left with them. They knew that Wright probably wouldn't like the furniture that they had from their Navy days, so they got rid of most of their furniture to move into the Wright house. But then when they moved out, that was the only furniture they had. So most of the pieces went with them. A few pieces stayed at the house then. This is the bedroom that Muriel and Alfred had. You can see the Lucy and Desi style twin beds there. There was a desk that Wright had designed for this bedroom, and there was another desk designed for the first bedroom for the Sweetens' daughter. And you can see two hassocks. There's a hassock here and one over by the desk. The one by the desk, as we learned later, was a little bit taller than the others. I'll show you how we figured that one out. And here's the house in 1965. Later on, the roof got covered with shingles just before the Sweetens sold. The roof that you see here is what's called a roll and batten roof. This is the same material that you use for asphalt shingles, but it comes in rolls. And then there were redwood battens that were set between them. It gave the look of a Bermuda roof. This was a roof that the house had originally been designed to have a cedar shake roof, but Mr. Sweeten was concerned, according to the correspondence, that it would be flammable, that embers from the farmer who was tending the peach orchard, he used to burn his weeds, that the embers would catch the roof on fire. So Wright, in a bit of correspondence, said, well, you can't afford a metal roof, so we'll put on your roof what we have on my barn. And I later found a picture, which you'll see, the Midway barn originally had this on it in the late 1930s. This is what the house looked like when Christine and I bought it. It had gotten a little overgrown and time had taken its toll. The owner that purchased it from the Sweetens, the developer, sold it to someone else within a couple of months, and that family lived in the house. They had the house for 30 some years, but hadn't lived in it full time in the last 10 or 15. And there had been a lot of deferred maintenance. So we had our work cut out for us when we bought the house. As you can see, everything had gotten pretty much overgrown. It's amazing what a yew bush can do if you don't prune it. So you can see, and here's our two heroes who are ready to take on the house. And we call this American Organic. So, having bought this thing, we decided how in the world are we gonna fix it up? Well, we decided that perfect restoration was not exactly what the house needed, because the house had some quirks of the 1950s, like a washing machine in the kitchen, not a working clothes dryer anywhere near the washer. And we needed to have places to do things that we do in the 21st century, like use a computer and things like that. So we said, well, what are our primary goals? We want to keep the house a desirable and convenient place for current and future users. We need to hold true to the original design intent, that it's informal and unpretentious, and we need to maintain Wright's grammar. Now, grammar is a word that Wright used to use, but it really means it is materials and details of construction, the way it looks and the way the pieces fit together. So we want to work with that with anything that we do with the house. So how do we do that? Well, you use the existing house as a pattern book. If you need a detail, look for it in the house. And when you need to do something that you don't find a detail for, you think, well, what would Wright do? So you look for similar situations in other Wright houses of the period. So it helps if you own a Frank Lloyd Wright house to buy books or borrow books and look at other Wright houses and go on tours of Wright houses, so you can see what the other houses are like. And it's interesting how even between a low budget house and like ours and a higher budget house of the era, there are some similarities to them. And Wright's work really has a consistency to it amid all of its unique qualities too. So starting off, we decided we'd start small. We'd do the bathroom. The bathroom is where you live every day, and the bathroom had some problems. So We had a sink that was leaking into the base cabinet and rotting it out. And so we decided, well, this tile wasn't original, so we thought we'd get rid of that. We needed to replace the sink. So we got a new sink and we restored the faces of the cabinetry and built new guts, set a new sink on it, and put those things back. We found that the redwood veneer plywood that Wright was using for the walls really didn't hold up too well in the bathrooms. Where it could get splattered with soapy water and humidity and steam, it was delaminating. So we decided that the house needed a more water-friendly surface. So Wright had used 1x1 tile in his houses in the later years. So we decided to use that. This is mounted onto hardy board, which is mounted on top of the plywood. So it's reversible if somebody wants to take it off and expose the wood again. The tub enclosure, well, the tub had a big rust spot in it, and somebody put this surround around it to cover up the plywood, which was not doing very well. And soap scum had kind of accumulated on the block. Block's kind of hard to clean when you've been showering in there. So we decided to do something different with that. You can see the delamination that was occurring with the plywood. So we got a new tub that fit the same footprint as the old one. And we did, again, the hardy board and tile around it. Everything's reversible. You can pull this off and try to refinish the wood that was in pretty bad shape underneath of it, but it was still sound, but it just didn't look good. And then we had a panel made that would kind of make the tub look a little bit more like Wright meant for it to be there. But we worked with Wright's design cues in the house. We ran where Wright had wood battens on the walls. We ran these tile strips along so that the line continued around the spaces. Our next job the next year was to work on the kitchen. So we moved all of our stuff out of the kitchen and kind of did camp stove living out in the living room while we did the kitchen. And you can see the kitchen. This is what it looked like when we bought it. It was pretty rough. It was pretty tired. There was a lot of rot on the cabinet, on the countertops. The faces of the cabinets were pretty tough, and the guts of the cabinets, the carcasses of the cabinets were pretty well rotted out. There had been a lot of plumbing leaking over the years that hadn't been tended to. And as you can see, that the kitchen wasn't exactly convenient for Christine, who is 4 feet 9 inches tall and 4 feet 9.5, I'm sorry. And she needed to reach the upper cabinets, and she was having to walk on top of the stove and the countertops, and it just was not a healthy thing. And we needed to get the clothes washer out of there. So what we did was we decided that we would keep as much as we could, but replace what we had to. So the base cabinets were in rough shape. So what we did was we decided to remove the faces of the cabinets and have new base cabinets made. We had the row of cabinets on the back side, on the west side of the house, set a little bit lower so ergonomically it worked better for Christine. And it also kept the cabinets and the stove further away from the undersides of the wall cabinets, which we were keeping. So you can see the result. And while we were doing our demolition, you never know what you're going to find in a Frank Lloyd Wright house. We actually found the paint samples that were painted on the walls, which helped us later for when we wanted to put things back to the original colors. These were samples that were put up for Davy Davison to see when he made a visit to the house in the summer of 1951. This is the kitchen as it exists now. We had the new cabinets made to look pretty much like the old ones. Used a new veneer, and we used cherry at the edge of the countertop so that it wouldn't be quite so dinged up as the redwood. You could look at the redwood funny and get a ding in it. But the grain looks good and it darkens over time. You can see we put in a library ladder so that Christine doesn't have to climb on our cabinets anymore. And we put in 2 burners for the stove. It's 2 double burner units, but we turned them parallel to the edge of the countertop so that they aren't underneath the cabinets. It gives a little bit of space to set things down back there and also a place for a downdraft vent. We hid electrical receptacles in these valances underneath the cabinets. Right, it had a valance, as you can see right here, for some intermittent fluorescent lights. So we took those out and replaced them with a continuous one where we could and we made it 2-tiered so we could have a power strip and then a new light strip underneath. So we're working with Wright's ideas. We're just treating them as a point of departure to do other things. And you don't waste anything. So you have the faces from the cabinets. So we remade 3 of the hassocks that had walked away from the house. And we based them on the designs that were on the drawings that Wright had prepared. A word about furniture. Sometimes it walks away. In the case of the Sweeten house, most of the furniture left with the Sweetens. And over time, they were approached when they were going into more assisted living. They were approached by someone looking to collect Wright furniture, sell it, and they did. Some of the pieces are still with the Sweetens, but most of them are gone. They got sold at New York auction houses and a Chicago auction house in a few years before we bought the house, and they got scattered to the 4 winds. So it sets up a situation like this. Somebody bought 2 of the chairs, and now you have 2 Sweeten chairs in a Paris flat. So they're now a few thousand miles away from anything that relates to them, and they're just sitting there looking kind of out of place and lonely. So they're in Paris, so they'll probably never come back to the United States. But sometimes furniture does walk back. After a New York Times article about the house, I got a call at the office from a woman who knew Muriel Sweeten in her later years. And Muriel was going into assisted care, and she asked this woman, "Is there anything from my apartment that you'd like to have that you might need?" And she said, "Well, I could use a footstool." So Muriel handed her this hassock from her house. And this woman read the article in the New York Times and said, you know, that she was going into assisted living herself and she needed to get rid of it, and her children really didn't want it. So she thought that Muriel might like to see it back in the house. And so she contacted me, and here it is. So we found out that this is one of the desk hassocks. It wasn't shown on the drawings as being taller, but it is a little bit taller than the hassock that's shown on the drawings. And when we measured it, it works well with the tabletop height that Wright had designed for the desk. So we believe that there's 2 of these around floating in the ether. The next project we did, now that we removed the clothes washer out of the kitchen and it was sitting on our porch, we decided that we should probably put it somewhere. So we decided to use the workshop then as a lifeboat to take on the tasks that the house really wasn't designed for. So we took on the workshop. The workshop really wasn't a finished space. It had a ceiling, but it had pull chain lights. It was heated, but it was really not a great finished space. It was space for a workbench and for some storage for Mr. Sweeten. So what we did was we had some power run to it. We had water run to it. We decided to put laundry in here, a half bath to serve the 3rd bedroom, and space for us to have desks and computers and things like that. So you can see the layout. Wright had shown on his drawing a closet in this location. So I used that as the jumping off point for me to make a closet for a stacked washer and dryer. And the room was set 24 inches below the rest of the house. So I had 4 stairs to deal with. So what I did was I had us come down a few steps to a raised platform. That way I could run the plumbing for the laundry. Water comes in, water goes out over the other side, and I could run the plumbing across the floor, not have to dig up the floor. We ran our desks over in here. We later changed our minds and put the desks over here. So you can see, you let the room help you design it. So we worked with the designs, with the design that Wright gave us. The windows set up a rhythm, and the stairs set up the elevations for us where our floor levels wanted to be. So you can see we framed out then where we wanted our half bath, ran the plumbing underneath of it so we didn't have to cut the concrete. And we wound up with a cabinet for our washer dryer, and we replicated the wall partition details that Wright had designed throughout the house. Redwood veneer plywood is hard to get now, so we carefully found fir plywood that had good grain, and then we stained it. We had a great craftsman working with us. His name is Ian Frank, and he did wonderful, wonderful work here. The tile work is by Christine, though. She has a real talent for that. And this is 1-by-1 tile, just like we saw at the Penfield house. They had a second floor bathroom in that house, and it used 1-by-1 red tile. So we used that then for our powder room. Again, replicating Wright's details, the battens. These were some storage bins that I put in behind where the laundry cabinet is. The piano hinged on the bottom, so they open out like a hopper. This was a detail that I saw in the Warren Pope house and in a couple other Wright houses. There wasn't a cabinet like that in the house, but it sure worked well. So we thought we would use Wright's pattern book, if you will. As one enters the room, I didn't want it to feel too cavernous. So Wright in the rest of the house hadn't run any of the closets up to the ceiling. They all stopped short of the ceiling so that there's a deck above them. And by taking that idea of Wright's, I made it such that when one entered the room from the little door leading to the third bedroom, you could see through to the window, and you could see through a transom leading into the powder room. You could see daylight. So it made these more like screens, the way that Wright treated the rest of the partitions. Again, trying to work with his ethic and design. This is inside the powder room. Wright had hidden vent pipes for plumbing in the other bathroom behind a plywood wall mounted atop the block wall. So I did the same here. And I kind of dressed it up with 3 shelves to give it that look and tie the battens over, give a 3-dimensional feel to it. Stacked box lights like Wright has in the rest of the house. Again, using his details. Had a corner sink here and a corner mirror, kind of riffing on the idea of the mitered corner glass on the house. It works well. It's almost like a airplane bathroom though. It's rather small because we set the partition to be between the casement windows that were against that wall. So I have one operable window in the powder room. Wright had used a corner toilet in the Penfield house in the powder room. So it seemed to be a really space efficient thing to do. So I found one, and that's how we did it. And the desks worked out in here. It was a seating space. Again, we replicated Wright's details, even the detail that Wright used somewhere else in the house to hide a wire coming down from the ceiling down to an electrical outlet on the underside of a shelf. We did a larger project then next where we got into restoring the window wall in the living room. This is a pretty comprehensive project. The projects that we had done before were kind of set up for that. We made it so that we could live in the bedroom wing of the house and then close off the kitchen and the bedroom wing with temporary partitions because we're going to need to really get into doing some roof work over here. So Wright had actually worked in, there was a coat closet here and then we call it the trunk room, storage closet for suitcases and things. So this actually acted like a passage from the bedroom hallway to the kitchen while we were doing our next phase of work. So the house had not aged well structurally. In an effort to keep costs down, Wright had used steel in the carport, but for one wonders why he hadn't done it in the kitchen or in the, in the living room. And so my structural engineer described it as this is basically a 60-year progressive collapse of a house. The roof was sagging down at its corner at the double cantilever. The ridge was 28 feet long and a double 2x6, and it was just sagging. And you can see that it was pushing the window wall out in plan, so it was bowing. And things were rotting, and things had taken their toll. Time had taken its toll on the house. So what we needed to do was we needed to restructure and restore and rebuild. So we started with the foundation. The posts that were between the French doors were just bearing on the concrete slab. They didn't have a direct foundation underneath of them. And they were rotting out from their bottoms. So we cut them off at their bottoms, and we eventually did replace them. But in this picture, we were just leaving them in so we could align our new footings for them. I created these new stainless steel post bases so that the so that these things wouldn't be soaking up water like they had been, like drinking straws, and rotting out. While we had done our excavation, I got to see the edge or underside of one of our radiant heating pipes, and it was wet. Now, somebody had just used a wet saw, so I thought, oh, it's just still wet from the wet saw. But 2 days later, it was still wet. So I got down in the trench and listened to it, and I could hear it making little noises. So I discovered that we had a leak. So we kind of cut back some concrete, and we pressure fit a new splice of pipe, emptied a few cans of Krylon paint on it, and poured over it and hope for the best. So it's the best you can do. While we were doing that work, we were going to be pouring a new slab at the edge of the house. We had been talking about that there really wasn't a patio at this house. There's no place for outdoor dining. And so when you don't have something at your house, you look to another Wright house. Well, when Frank Lloyd Wright designed the Schauberg house in Michigan a couple of years after the Sweeten house, the Sweeten house was kind of the point of departure. You'll actually see that this is a rendering for the Schauberg house, a very early rough one. And it looks a lot like the Sweeten house, and the plan is actually somewhat similar to it. The Schauberg house developed into something much more elaborate and larger, and it bears very little resemblance to the Sweeten house now. But I was very interested in seeing this early design because Wright has a patio next to the carport. This is the same arrangement as my living room and kitchen at the Sweeten house. So Wright seemed to think that this might be a good place for a patio. You can see it here in the rendering. So we thought, well, if it's good for that, it might be good here. So we had a patio made right where Wright showed it for the Schauberg first iteration, and it works great for our iteration of the Sweeten house. So, and getting into the restoration of the roof, we pulled down the ceiling, protected everything that was built in, and protected the floor so that doesn't get damaged, and basically lived with a construction site for about 6 months. And we found that the framing was overall in pretty good condition. It was just woefully undersized in some places. It was interesting. Wright had steel in some places, but there were places where he should have had steel that he didn't. So what we did was we found that the solution to sagging cantilevers was steel. We put some spring back into our cantilevers and made the house look good. So you can see these two steel tubes are taking the place where Wright had doubled 2x6s that were attached to the ridge, and they bared on this. You see back in this picture, there's a concrete block pier right here, and the two beams would connect into the ridge, kind of like the anchorage, then the fulcrum, then the cantilever. They kind of stick out that way. But doubled 2x6s just weren't doing the job. So what we did was we inserted some steel, and at the fascia, this was supposed to be a doubled 2x6 behind the decorative fascia, and it was sagging because this was sagging and it was sagging with it. So what we did was we did what Wright did in some other houses, which was called a flitch plate beam, in which you use a piece of steel plate sandwiched between pieces of 2x lumber. So we put in flitch plates at every 4 feet where they met the vertical mullions between the French doors, and bolted them together to make a moment connection. So architect talk for a really stiff connection so it doesn't try to bow or act like a hinge. And we put the flitch plate beam out of the fascia so it carries everything nice and straight, as you can see in the finished picture here. Once we had the roof in shape, then we had the French doors rebuilt, and we insulated by putting in rigid board insulation with aluminum foil facing on it. The aluminum foil is really good. We only had a 2x6 roof frame, so there's not a lot of room for insulation. So the foil facing provides a real good infrared barrier, which helps to minimize the amount of heat being radiated into the room during the summer. So you can see we kind of put it back to the way it looked in the picture that William Allen Storr took in 1970, just before the shingles went on. We got the sags out and we put back on the roll roofing, which I'll go into next. So this was a picture from 1938 that John Howe took at the Midway Barns out at Taliesin. And you can see the batten strips and you can see the roll roofing on this building here, which I don't think exists anymore, but then you can see it on the Midway Barn out behind. And then this is how it looked when it was first built at the Sweeten House. So we had to restore the roof. So this is what it looked like with shingles and with Christine on it. And then what we did was we stripped it off and we found that there was actually 4 layers of roofing on the roof. You're only supposed to have 2, but what was good about finding 4 layers of the roof, we actually found the original roll roofing, so we could know exactly what color it was, and we could then duplicate it. So we put down an ice and water shield over the whole thing just to be safe. And we then had the roll roofing put down. So the rolls extend, they're about 36 inches wide. So they actually extend from 1 batten up to 2 battens above. So there's actually a lot of overlap on these. The battens were originally redwood when Wright did the house. And we used Trex decking so that it would not rot or check. We have found that it expands and contracts a little bit. And we may have to do something with that, but it's working quite well and looks good and has the original character of the house. One of the things that we noticed though, when we restored the roof, if you look back at the earlier picture, you'll notice that the red shingles, it's the right color, but you don't have the texture of the roll roofing. Notice the striations of the block. Wright had the bed joints struck with a deep groove. So you got the emphasis of those horizontal lines. The roll and batten roof picks up on that same striation and it unifies the design of the house. So details are very important on a Wright house. You want to try to keep to what Wright originally did. In 2017, you know, stuff happens. It's an old house. One morning I found water on the floor in the workshop. And I thought, oh my goodness, the washer's leaking. I'll shut off the water in the washer. Water kept coming. So, oh, the water must be leaking in the powder room. Well, I shut off the water in the powder room. I was like, oh no, it really is still leaking. So I shut off the water at the boiler and it stopped leaking. So I figured, well, we have a big problem. So I got a leak detection company out and 2 guys walked around the house for an hour with socks and microphones the size of teacups. And after about an hour, they drew a chalk line on my floor. And sure enough, that's exactly where the leak was. So you can see how the radiant floor system works a little bit here. You can see the tubes running away around. This is the supply pipe that runs around the perimeter, and then it branches off. And then the little pipe kind of mows the lawn across the room and heats the room. And then this eventually goes back to the last section. This is a return pipe, which everything then connects into. So this is a piece of pipe that was going into that lower level workshop. This is the return pipe coming out of the lower level workshop. Problem is that this wall is concrete block, but the foundation wall is cinder block, which is much more absorbent, lets a lot of water through. These 2 pipes were bathed in storm water when we would have a very, very hard, heavy rain and the ground couldn't soak up the water fast enough. It was coming in here. And they rusted through. So what we did was we got a craftsman to saw cut the floor, carefully chip away from the pipes, and we set 2 valves. We decided to abandon the radiant floor in the lower level room because it was going to be a problem in the future, because we figured it's probably rotting out too if it was wet up here. The main pipe seemed to be in good shape, knock off wood, but at the lower section was probably going to have problems. So we decided to set valves and then run PEX tubing to some base 4 hot water in the other room. So we then fixed everything up, put in an access panel and match the floor and patch it up and move on. So these are just some pictures of what it's like to live in the house. You know, it changes. It's so different at different times of the year. This was taken a few weeks ago when the Japanese maple was in its glory. When you approach the house, you have the carport stretching out to meet you and kind of compressing you into the front door. You have that long beautiful linear quality of the house as it stretches across the lawn. This is the door to that workshop that we talked about. This is inside the living room, looking over towards the dining room. You know, summer morning, I guess. But it's funny how different times of the year and times of the day and different weather conditions can really change the character of the space. The neat feature of this house is that the transoms don't have a structural bar visible. The glass is let into a rabbet at the edge of the ceiling so that your eye is drawn right through the glass and out to the edge. The whole idea of this house is that you're sheltered, but you aren't enclosed. And that detail plus the mitered corners of the glass really reinforce that. And it's really a wonderful house to be. And it's amazing considering that this really was a modest budget for Frank Lloyd Wright. He really still hit all of his high marks on it. This is looking at our restored French doors, glistening beautifully in the sun. A snow picture that Christine took that I really like. It's amazing that it just has a warm quality sitting in that cold landscape. And looking from the one of the bedrooms towards the corner window of the dining room, you can see the redwood veneer plywood walls and stuff. And you can also see how the closet wall doesn't meet the ceiling up here. It kind of makes the room seem a little bit bigger because you really aren't aware of where all the edges and corners are because there's always a little bit of space hidden from view. And you notice things when you live in a house like this, the way the sun plays on the walls when at a certain time of the year you get this little slit of light in the afternoon, or the way the shadows catch the battens and the piano hinges and cast shadows in neat ways. Or you'll notice sometimes the way the sun is shining in and reflecting off the glass, and you walk over to the corner and take a look at it. And you look outside and you see that the house is casting a shadow. It's really cool to look at. So that the house is just, you notice something new every day. I think Roland Risley had said it right, that he still notices things and that he hasn't noticed before. And it really enriches life looking at a house like this. And that's what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Since you started talking, the sun has come out here, so a brighter, brighter background for me. What a wonderful story and a beautiful job that you and Christine have done. I feel like we got the next best thing to you having a reality show where we could watch you week to week tackle all of these challenges. I'm sure we have some good questions, and so I'll pull them up. And Arthur asks, when you were coming up and studying architecture, did you ever imagine living in a Frank Lloyd Wright house?
I imagined it, but I really didn't think I would ever do it. I first saw this house probably about 12 years before we bought it. I kind of looked at it from the edge of the driveway and I thought, wow, this is a really neat Frank Lloyd Wright house in really rough shape, but it's actually not out in the middle of nowhere. It seemed approachable. And, but I put that out of my head, and then later on it came up for sale, and Christine suggested that we go look at it because we needed to move back to this area to help with relatives that were getting old. So.
Great. Kevin is wondering about how long you've owned the house. He was able to tour it during the Philadelphia Building Conservancy Conference a number of years ago, and wondered if you were the owner at that time.
Yeah, that was the wet shoe tour. We had roof leaks then. We bought the house in March of 08. We kind of camped with it for about a year while we were trying to sell our other house, and we moved in full time in March of 09. So, and we've been gradually working on it.
And he wonders, who did you acquire the property from?
We acquired it from the late Albert Clark. He was an architect in South Jersey.
Were the Sweetens bothered much by Frank Lloyd Wright fans when they owned the house?
According to the Sweetens' daughter, people did come to see the house, but it didn't necessarily bother them, no.
It seems that it was somewhat removed from the main road, that maybe you had to be looking for it, right?
Right. It was an unusual house that I think people saw and thought was interesting, but a list of Wright's work wasn't published until 1960.
True.
In Edgar Kaufman Jr.'s book, and then William Allen Store's book came out about 10 years later.
This refers to a slide that you showed towards the beginning where Mrs. Sweeten is sitting at the loom, and there's a curtain to her left. And the question is, what is the curtain hiding?
There is a mitered corner of glass that looks out to the front porch of the house. So the glass kind of does a zigzag. In the plan, let me see if I can, much simpler just to describe it. The glass does a zigzag. So it comes out from the wall, turns 90 degrees, goes to the front door, and then makes a side light to the door, turns another 90 degrees, and goes back to the bedroom hallway wall. And it just provided a little bit of privacy from inside the house. If somebody was walking up to the front door, they wouldn't be able to look right into the living room. That doesn't bother us, so we prefer to be able to use them on the front porch. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Karen asked how you got heat to the workshop space.
The way we got heat was the supply and return pipes that branched off, we set valves on those, and we ran PEX tubing into baseboard hydronic. Wright had actually originally designed it to be baseboard in that room alone. He may have been concerned about groundwater, I don't know. But we ran the water into a baseboard that runs along the south wall of the house, and it returns back to the house the way it always did. So it's just it's a branch off of the main system.
Mm-hmm. I believe you said that the walls were concrete blocks. Yes. There was a question about whether it was cast or blocks.
These are actually just standard run-of-the-mill concrete blocks.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually one of the reasons why they're painted. Standard concrete block, the color really varies quite a bit, and the texture varies a bit. So Wright had specified that they be painted, and there's a little bit of sand in the paint.
A few technical questions coming your way here. Let's see. How are the omnipresent cantilevered running bookshelves attached to the walls?
There are cleats that are driven with masonry nails into the walls. There are vertical fins that support them. The combination of the cleat and the vertical fin actually create a little bit of a box beam that's kind of essentially mounted to the wall. Okay. Don't ask me how those shelves got mounted onto those slats between the kitchen. I'm still trying to figure that one out.
Is the patio concrete colored before pouring?
No, it's not. It's poured, and then there is powder shaken into it. Schofield makes the product. It used to be made by the Horn Company, but it's the same stuff. It's a powder with oxide in it, and powder gets shaken onto the wet concrete, and then it gets troweled in. So the actual thickness of the color is between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch.
Interesting. Is this something that Wright would have had at his disposal, or is this a newer product? Or
no, the product that's made today is essentially the same as it was back then. It's just a different company. But we did everything the way it was originally done.
Mark H. said that your photo of the approach to the house from the carport made him think of the roof as you approached the Unitarian Meeting House in Madison. I can see that with the slope.
Yeah.
Andy asks, any work needed in the fireplace chimney area?
Funny you should ask. Yes, it didn't draw very well. The chimney from the floor to the top of the chimney is only about 12.5 feet. And with the side, it's a corner fireplace with the opening is 56 inches high. It didn't draw very well. You needed to have a good roaring fire with the logs stood up like a teepee in the back corner to get it to draw. Then when the fire would kind of burn down the smolder, it would smoke up the room. So what I did was there are some calculations that you can do for corner fireplaces. And I was able to determine that if I raised the fire up 24 inches off the floor, it would draw better. So I had a grating made, a fire grate made that looks kind of like one of the hassocks out of steel. And that holds the fire 24 inches off the floor and also radiates heat into the house pretty well. We also took the damper off that was just above the firebox, and we put a chimney cap that has a damper that's controlled by two cables that come down the flue. And that keeps the flue warm for when you go to start the fire. So it actually draws a lot better now. We don't have any problems with it now.
Oh, interesting. Do you know if other homeowners have used the same technique? Is it something you
Others have used the top damper. I know that John Eifler used that when he did his restoration in Seth Peterson Cottage. That was where I first heard of it. Mm-hmm. And again, look at Wright houses, you learn things. And the making of the grating was unusual that Wright, I think it was because of the budget of the house, Wright didn't design a grate for it. He typically designed grates for the houses, but not for this one. But raising the floor, raising the fire up from the floor really helped. And it's also reversible. Two guys can lift the thing out and the thing looks the way it did in 1950. So.
Speaking of budget, this is a question about your budget and just that you had probably a budget in mind for restoration, and did you come close to that?
I exceeded it.
Okay.
I'll say I exceeded. I think when all's said and done, I probably spent almost as much on the restoration as I did on buying the house.
Oh, sure. Well, certainly you're, bringing up a basement has us all wondering about if there's anything interesting about the basement or the stairs down to it.
They are the exact rise and run of the stairs inside the units of the Price Tower. They're 8-inch treads and 8-inch risers. So you have to crab your feet down it because the stairs are so shallow and steep. The basement is basically a concrete block with a reinforced concrete ceiling bunker. It would work well as a bomb shelter, I think. Mm. It's got a boiler and a lot of pipes in it. So, a little bit of storage. We have some storage in there, but not much.
So there's a question about glazing. The single glazing an issue with condensation and runoff staining?
The glazing, we get at the beginning of the season, when we first turn on the boiler, we'll get a lot of condensation on the windows, and I'll wipe it down so that it doesn't really get all over the windows and start running down the walls. But after that first fog up, if you want to call it that, it really doesn't do that much for the rest of the year. It's dry enough in here during the winter that we really don't get much in the way of condensation on the glass other than when Christine's making broth or something like that.
Right. And so the follow-up question to that was, have you had to incorporate ventilation systems to counter it?
No, we haven't. The house ventilates itself quite well. There's no weather stripping on any of these windows. There's plenty of air changes. We did add ventilation to the roof though. We put a ridge vent on the roof, and I didn't want to cut up the soffits because they're such a design feature from the inside. I used something called an edge vent, which pulls the air in from the top surface of the sheathing at the edge just above the roof edge.
Well, certainly many compliments here in the feed. I want to make sure that I pass that on. Thank you for sharing your beautiful house with us. There was a question about how you selected and acquired hardware.
I was blessed. Mr. Sweeten, being the naval architect that he was, I think he figured that things would eventually break. So I found a box hidden in the basement, this old, dirty, falling apart box was filled with doubles and triples and quadruples of most of the hardware that's in the house. So the house came with its own spare parts. So it's come in very handy. With the Sweetens never built the window screens that Wright had designed. So we've been building those as we finish the house, and I've been able to use the hardware that Mr. Sweeten bought on the new pieces. He may have even bought those intending to do the screens, and that might be why they're there. So.
Thank you. Let's see, do you have air conditioning?
We do. We have Mitsubishi mini splits. The previous owner had put a couple of units in, one in the living room, one in the master bedroom, and one in the dining room. We use them primarily in dehumidification mode. The house doesn't get terribly hot in the summer because of the shade from the trees and the roof overhangs, but it can get very humid such that towels don't dry very well and that kind of stuff. So we run the dehumidifiers. It actually does have a benefit in that they do have a heating function. There are times in the fall and the spring where you don't want to turn on the boiler and get the floor up to 125 degrees, only to have the temperature go up to 70 degrees in the day and then you roast. So we use the heat pump function on the mini splits until it's time to turn the boiler fully on again. So.
Interesting. Any idea on how much the original house cost? I believe you mentioned that.
It was just under $24,000 for the house, the lot, Wright's fee, the extras. Like for instance, Wright had designed the house to have standard plywood partitions with just redwood plywood on the cabinet doors and closet doors. But the Sweetens were able to get a good price such that it wasn't that much more to do the redwood. So all the partitions are redwood, and they added some extras here and there to it, and including a room. And but it was a little under $24,000. Mm-hmm. They sold it for $75,000 in 1974.
Okay. One last question. How high is the ceiling in the room carport with the sloped roof that your wife was lying on?
Oh, okay. That is, well, she was on the workshop roof. That roof comes down to about 3.5 or 4 feet above grade. So it makes it so that you don't really have to use a ladder to get up on the roof to take leaves out of the scuppers and stuff. So.
Handy.
I hate ladders.
Well, I'm sorry if there were a few more in the queue, but it is 2 o'clock and I want to respect your time. Dan, thank you so much for being with us. And what a great way to see how you've sort of practically applied Wright's principles throughout the house. And it's just terrific to see it virtually. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
And audience, thank you so much. I think some of you are joining us for the first time. And so please know that you'll be notified in another 24 hours or so. Zoom sends an automatic email. We'll ask you about your experience. Please do share your feedback with us. And we would be happy to let you know about future lectures that are coming up month to month here. So thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.